art is white. What do I mean by that? Usually when I do these, it's like off the dome. I'm improvising. I'm just taking what I know in the moment. But what I'm talking about is something that I found on Twitter. Yes, I'm on Twitter a lot. And it was this thing that was re-uploaded from TikTok, actually, where Denzel Washington was being interviewed by, I guess, a movie buff, or like you know how a lot of actors, when they have a rollout for a new film, and they interview people. So this was for Gladiator, right? And I've heard good reviews for Gladiator and stuff like that. So he came in, right? He sat down. He said, "I wore my favorite Stanley Kubrick shirt, right?" And I was wondering, as I guess an opener, right? What is your favorite Stanley Kubrick? And Denzel was like, basically, I don't have one, right? I wasn't doing that back in those days, and I was the person to rob you if you ever came out. The whole, that's, if you see the video, you know what I'm talking about, right? I say all that to say that it's very interesting, as someone who is a amateur filmmaker, as somebody who has made my like films for at least, I say, 5 to 10 years. I make horror films. I do a lot of different things with black people only. I just love making fantasy films, horror films, surreal films, just with black faces, right? And I went to an art School of Art, Institute of Chicago, like back in 2022. Like, it was just for a semester. Then I was like, it's expensive. I did too much, and they don't have good programs for me, and I decided to come back home to Harrisburg, Mississippi. But what I have noticed throughout many films that I've liked is that a lot of the default is whiteness. And that even with all the progress we made, like I've said in other videos where they show a lot of diversity, it is still centered around whiteness. That it is silly for so many white people to be upset, or a certain demographic of white people in America to be upset, saying they're being erased, because there is no form of erasure even when a white person is with a person of color. Because if the default of any type of imagery within the media is whiteness, somebody being in a relationship with someone who is white, it's not going to erase the white person. That's not how it works, right? Whiteness is not going to get erased if a person of color is being paired with it, right? You can't be the default and get erased just because somebody else is mingling with you or interacting with you or is trying to be an equal with you. That's just not how whiteness works. And so a lot of times, if you go into art history classes, if you've looked at art in a museum, you will notice that a lot of it is white. The default is white. They'll have a certain area where they'll have black people, African type of, artifacts. They'll have from indigenous groups and stuff like that, that hopefully they didn't steal, but at the end of the day, it has always been surrounded by white people. So, of course, when you go into film analysis, a lot of white people will sit there and be like, this is the greatest movie. And it's probably from like, Italians, the French people, a lot of Europeans, basically. And you will look for the black films, and you'll get to a certain period, like, we're talking about Spike Lee era, 80s, 90s, maybe if it is back in the day, like maybe one where it has Sidney Poitier, but you're not going to get something that's like overtly black, even though they've had that during the early ages of cinema. They had black films, but censorship and racism and white supremacy. And so that particular type of prioritization of white bodies, white faces, white, has always been associated with, art, and it continues to this day. And to overcompensate for that, if you were somebody who is black, a lot of the times, the only way to be worthy as an artist is to talk about your trauma, is to talk about your pain, is to talk about what do you do as a black person in spite of having to deal with this whiteness. So you'll see a lot of artists in the galleries, a lot of artists in the movies, a lot of different types of black films and black projects by so many artists, and it is indicative of that. I always think of this statement where they said that Viola Davis was the black Meryl Streep, right? I said that it's going to take so many more years to really wring that out. It's going to take more and more years and a lot of support from the black community to have more stories and more depictions of black people that go beyond what happens when you have to deal with racism or the Jim Crow era or slavery or being dehumanized as a black person. It's going to take a lot to really wring that out, to really show that we can also be the default within cinema. But yeah, that's just something that I wanted to say. Probably I might make a follow-up video of that to articulate myself a little bit better, but I have to go now. So